Get started. So we've hit 12:30, since otherwise we will run out of time, which is lovely. So welcome everyone, and thank you for being here as part of Ready to Teach Week. I'm Charlotte Young. I'm a strategic lead here at the Institute for Teaching and Learning Innovation, and I'm really delighted to be teaching on inclusive teaching today. Or presenting on inclusive teaching today. Apologies, let me find my clicker. There it is. Okay. So I would like to start with an acknowledgement of country. So the University of Queensland acknowledges the traditional owners and their custodianships on the land of which we meet, and we pay our respects to the ancestors and the descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country, and we recognise their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. And this coming Friday marks the anniversary of the National Apology to Stolen Generations. And for me, when I read that, it was a reminder that learning is not only about where we are going, but also where we have come from. And to me, inclusive teaching asks us to hold both and to recognise histories of exclusion and harm, and to commit to learning spaces where all students are seen and respected and supported to belong. So as we begin today, I really invite us to carry that spirit of reflection and responsibility into how we teach, learn, and support one another. So I would like to start with an invitation to participate. So you'll see an invitation to participate on the screen. And this is intentional. It models one of the practices I'll talk a little bit later about today. But what I would like you to do is to please use this space in a manner that facilitates your learning. So you're welcome to put your cameras on if you feel comfortable to do that, but you're welcome to have them off. That also makes you feel more comfortable. Please, I would ask if you have one voice at a time, but you're very welcome to use the chat if you would like to. Please ask questions. If you want to raise your hand, I'll come to you, but either pop them into the chat as well. You're welcome to eat and drink, particularly as this is scheduled over lunch. So feel free to do that. Take breaks if you need to, step away, leave to go to your next meeting, that's also fine. Please contribute your experiences, perspectives, step up or back as you feel comfortable, and be respectful of how others are using this space to learn. Okay, so what will we cover today? We're going to look a little bit about what inclusive teaching means. Why does it matter at UQ? Some inclusive teaching strategies. We only have 50 minutes. I can't cover it all, but we're going to go through some. Time to reflect and share, and a thank you and a wrap up. And we do have a short poll at the end of this for evaluation purposes to feedback to hopefully improve for next time. So if you have a moment to fill that out, that would be very much appreciated. So I would like to start by just asking you all to take a moment to briefly reflect. What does the term inclusive teaching mean to you? And if you feel comfortable, to pop one word or short phrase into the chat. Open and accessible, embracing diversity, not excluding anyone, safe spaces, lovely, accepted, belonging, creating a safe space, consideration, being heard, lovely, opening your learning to all students, perfect, considering learners from all backgrounds and abilities, responding to needs, belonging, beautiful. Okay, thank you. Fabulous, feeling welcome. Thank you, Chris. Excellent. Opportunities for all. Thank you, Dom. To engage and succeed, creating a safe space. Excellent. So these are all bang on, and you'll see that in the next slide as well. But what I'd like to really flag here is that none of these were about what we teach in terms of the content. This was all about how we teach, which is quite interesting because often when we think about, oh, we need to make our practice inclusive, how do we do that? It needs a big course redesign. But this isn't about content. This is about how and our way of thinking and approaching teaching. So yeah, thank you. So inclusive teaching is often talked about in many different ways. And one widely used definition that I quite like, which I think captures the mindset behind this work, comes from Christine Hawkins, and they wrote it drawing on a synthesis of research in higher education. And that definition is inclusive learning and teaching in higher education refers to the ways in which pedagogy, curriculum, and assessment are designed and delivered to engage students in learning that is meaningful, relevant, and accessible to all. And we had that come through about being accessible to all. It embraces a view of the individual and individual differences as a source of diversity that can enrich the lives and learning of others. And so from this definition, we can kind of distill three core ideas. And one of those is that it's about designing and teaching with intentionality. So inclusive teaching is more about conscious choices, not necessarily doing more, but being more deliberate in how we design and deliver our learning. It's also about anticipating that student diversity. So student diversity isn't an exception, it's the norm, and inclusive teaching sort of assumes that variation from the outset, and then we design with intentionality to kind of meet that. And the last one is sort of about reducing unnecessary or unintentional barriers that potentially prevent people from engaging. Okay, so why does inclusive teaching matter at UQ? Or why does it matter now particularly? Australian universities are becoming more diverse. And so when we think about the diversity of our cohorts, there's a range of different students that might make our cohorts more diverse. So we now have students with disability, those who might be first in family to go to tertiary education, varying differences in educational background, geographical location, so students from rural and remote areas, gender and sexual orientation, age, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, those who might be financially disadvantaged or from low SES and so forth. So we have a range of different aspects that might contribute to the diversity of our cohort. And often we'll have a lot of intersectionality between those groups. So we'll have students who often potentially fall into multiple groups in that space as well. And so in addition to this, we've also got our diversity of cohort likely to increase because increasing participation of underrepresented students is now a core focus in national policies. And the Australian Universities Accord highlighted that participation gaps still exist and sort of set new equity targets for higher educations to meet. So we're likely to have an increase in the diversity of our students as well. And encouraging inclusive teaching is one way UQ is responding to sort of those new targets and thinking about how can we support our diversity of students. And inclusive teaching is really laid out in quite a number of UQ strategies, which I've sort of depicted on the screen there. So it's really kind of a core thing happening at UQ at the moment. And so what this means for our teaching is there's no typical UQ student. I would argue that there probably never really was, but possibly there was at one point. And that our teaching practices really need to respond to this reality that we now have. And so today, because we have sort of 50 minutes to look at some things, and because we're right at the beginning of semester, I'm going to look at sort of some inclusive teaching strategies, and I'd like to sort of set the scope a little bit. So what am I going to look at? Because we're kind of just coming into teaching, I've aimed to try and give some sort of low effort practical strategies, and you can let me know later on if you think I nailed that or if I was way off base. Things that hopefully you can do now. I'm not necessarily saying do all, but hopefully some you can do now. Suggestions, not requirements. These are things to add to your toolbox that fit your context. If they don't work for you, you don't have to use them. But if there's things that resonate, please take them, adapt them, and use them as fits your purpose. This is not all you can do. This is not a comprehensive list. So if you go and do these things and you say, I'm inclusive, there's always more to do if you would like to, but these are some things, but not all things. I've tried not to put things on the list that require whole course redesigns because we are right at the beginning of the semester and it's probably a little bit poor timing. And likewise, ones that don't require rewriting assessments. So if there's some people in the room who are like, why didn't you get them to do this? That is why, just for timing purposes, it possibly wasn't got time. So I've thought of sort of 5 areas of small changes that we can potentially focus on. So 1, welcoming and setting students up for success. And I know, Chris, you added welcoming as one of the comments you put in earlier. Clarity, consistency, and cognitive loads. How can we potentially reduce some of those unintentional barriers around this that might be causing students to not engage? Supporting participation, but from a breadth of participants in the room. And a little bit about transparent assessment as well, because obviously it's the main cause of anxiety for our students. As I go along, we have wonderful experts in the room. please feel free to share your own tips and examples as we chat through. So I'll put a few examples on the slides as we go. If you can think of others, please do feel free to share them. It would be really nice to have sharing of practice so other people can pick up tips and tricks as we go along as well. Because as I said, I've not tried to do a comprehensive list, so I'm sure you have some excellent ones as well. So the first one I wanted to talk about was welcoming students and setting up to succeed. So how can you help students feel orientated and invited into learning and confident about where to start? So this is quite important. So welcoming practices help students feel orientated and invited into learning rather than needing to work things out on their own. Before students can even start to think about engaging with content, they're often trying to answer some really practical questions like, where do I start? How do I prepare? What actually matters in this course? And so when students know where to start and how to feel prepared and what matters, they're more likely to engage early and less likely to fall behind silently. So how might we foster this with our students? So one example is to provide a short video message or a message of some sort to get sort of a get to know me video or Padlet. So just introducing yourself to your students in a sort of friendly way and potentially also telling them sort of outline how learning will happen in this course. Ideally with a bit of passion and excitement, convey why you liked your subject or why you got into your area in the first place, humanize yourself. I like to add a dog if I can, some sort of pet. Have a clear start here section in Blackboard. And this is particularly really relevant for anyone who's sort of got a first semester, first year or first year in a postgraduate course. When a student first goes to Blackboard, once they've even navigated to Blackboard in the first instance, it can feel really overwhelming to open the page and sort of try and determine where they've got to go or what they've got to do. So having it start here, like this is where I want you to first orientate yourself, can really help students reduce that anxiety and uncertainty. Be quite explicit on how to prepare for week one and before each class, if that's an expectation in your course, okay? So don't assume that students will know that they need to go to the week one folder and find resources in preparation for the class. You will need to potentially direct them to that and potentially have a week one folder that then says before class resources, in class resources, after class resources, being explicit about how you're directing students to those particular things. Use plain language as much as possible, and as difficult as it is, try and avoid UQ jargon. And so I've got an example here that I've been guilty of at times. I've sent an email to students and said, if you have a question about this, contact faculty. And they're like, where on earth is faculty? Is it a building? Is it a place? Is it an email? What do you mean? Or you say, contact the library. It's very easy to say that, but they're like, do I just walk into the library and find a person? How do I contact them? So being more explicit in what we mean when we say contact faculty or contact the library, or even what you mean by an extension and so forth like that. Is it teaching staff? Yep. Thank you, Chris. So those sorts of things in clarification in language can be really, really helpful. Release your course profile, Blackboard site, and course materials early. So obviously we have UQ policy that says course profiles need to be available at least 1 week before the teaching activity or the first teaching activity for a course, and Blackboard sites need to be available by the first day of O week. But you are able to open those earlier if you would like to, and it can be a really nice way to sort of allow students to plan and think about what the requirements are for that course ahead of time, particularly if they need more planning and processing time. And then also think about your Blackboard site as you go through this semester, whether you can release your course materials early, because that could be really, really helpful to students as well. Because it enables to potentially get ahead when they're feeling really well or when they have low caring responsibilities or low work commitments. And then if, that way they're ahead so that if when they feel unwell or their work commitments get high, they're not necessarily falling behind the rest of the cohort. So that can be really, really helpful to help people prep and manage the various competing demands. Build in regular touch points to help understand learner needs. So this can be something that you do before the start of semester, send out a little survey to find out a little bit about your students' confidence or previous knowledge with particular discipline areas. Sort of say, hey, I'm really interested in your learning, and then potentially adapt your practice a little bit because of that. But also checking in with them a lot as you go throughout the survey and saying, I'm really interested in how you're going and how you're feeling. It makes them feel valued, like you're listening to them, particularly if you take that feedback and adjust your teaching as you go. And these can be low stake things done in class, like a little poll or an exit ticket, which is sort of where you get somebody to fill something out as they leave the room. The next one I wanted to talk about was clarity and consistency and cognitive load. So when expectations are kind of implicit and sort of reduce guesswork, students who already understand university culture tend to do better, and others who don't necessarily understand the sort of university culture spend a lot of energy guessing what you're trying to tell them to do. And that guessing adds to the cognitive load and takes attention away from the learning itself. Okay. So students may be unsure about what to prioritize or how much time to spend or when to ask for help. And many won't potentially ask until they're already struggling. So clarity and consistency isn't necessarily about lowering standards. It's about helping make expectations visible and reduce unnecessary barriers so that students can focus their energy on learning rather than decoding the course. And so some ways you might be able to do this is clear course and assessment structure. So telling students sort of how different pieces fit together can help reduce the cognitive load of trying to think, how does this assessment fit with this assessment and this assessment? And I've got an example of that on the next slide for you. Naming timing expectations can be really helpful. It potentially helps with students sort of planning realistically to sort of fit things in around various commitments, but also helps reduce anxiety about whether they're spending too much or too little time on a particular activity. Have I given this the appropriate amount of thought, or was actually that 10 minutes all I was expected to spend on that particular reading? Consistent class structure and routines, both online and in person. So online, do you have a clear layout of your Blackboard site? The amount of time that students spend trying to find resources on your Blackboard site it's quite a big frustration for students, particularly when they do it across 4 courses. So try and think, do I have a clear layout in my Blackboard? Do I have week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4? And within those folders, do I have a consistent layout? So for instance, in my classes, I used to have a first year class. I used to do before class, during class, which would have their lecture materials and their resources that they would be reading in class with the case studies. And then I'd have an after class format. So that was really, really easy to follow. And then students could see that I had the same format every single week. I had all of the assessment content only in the assessment folder. I didn't put it into any of the weeks or various things like that. Thank you for your question, Lorna. The Blackboard Ultra does, so the e-learning team do have an example Blackboard site, so a template that you can use to sort of demonstrate what that might look like. And we'll see if somebody, maybe me at the end, can share that with you. And so it takes the guessing work away for students on what's going to be in each folder and where can I find things. The other thing is looking at how can you be consistent in class? So do you have a consistent flow for each of your sessions or your workshops so that students can know that, the workshop might open with a question and it's going to follow by some group activity. Then there might be a personal time for reflection and there might be another group activity, or your lecture might start with a question from the previous work's content and then a little bit of content delivery and maybe in a poll or a Padlet. So again, trying to see that consistency and routine to help students think and follow through your class and just reduce that cognitive load for them. Being explicit about when and how students should contact you. So again, just making it really clear to students, if you need assistance or need support or need to ask questions or need to contact them, this is how you do it. So you might say to them, for all course-related questions, please put your questions up onto the discussion board or onto this Padlet. For all personal, non-course-related questions, I would prefer if you email me as the course coordinator. Please put the subject line for your course in the email in the subject line and email your questions through that way. So being really explicit in what you want students to do. And some people even give their students email templates to sort of follow so that it's really, really clear for them. Invitation to learn. So that's something I showed at the beginning of this session. I did it for an online session, so I adapted it a little bit for that. But you can also do it for a face-to-face class. So you can say, you are welcome to get up and go to the toilet. You're welcome to get up and stretch or eat or drink or whatever it is. It's amazing the number of students who come from sort of high school where they're not allowed to just get up and go and leave the room when they want to. The anxiety that it produces when they're sitting in a 2 hour or 3 hour lecture and they're like, I've got to get through this class, but I really need to go to the bathroom. It's so just letting them know actually in this space that is allowed. So just letting them know what the expectations are for the room and for the space so they can put that aside and just focus on participating with a bit more confidence and ease. And the last one here is normalize asking questions and help seeking. So even label it as a skill. So let them know that, you know, if you're asking for help or asking the right questions in class, you're actually developing a skill. It's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. And that can really help students to think, oh, okay, you know, it's okay in this space to ask questions. And we had some others. Could you show an example of the discussion board? I believe there is one on the example site, but I will have a think and I will get your comment and I'll make sure I follow up with you later. Thank you. Sorry, I can't use your name because it's a student number there. Okay. So the next, oh, sorry, this is the example of how you might visually display that connection between content and assessment as well. So for instance, you've got 1 to 3 is looking at the foundational content, and you can see that there's a summary at the end of that with an assessment. And then we've got weeks 3 to 8 looks at application, and then that's summarized by another assessment. And then we build that on again in sort of weeks 8 to 13. And I can see that assignment 3 is a hurdle and so forth. So again, it's just a visual way for students to sort of see how is all this learning building and interacting with each other. Thank you, Steph, for sharing that. Okay, so the next one I want to look at is supporting participation. So particularly looking at widening who can engage, how they can contribute, and whose voices are being heard in the learning space, okay? So often when we think about, or often I've heard, I should say, is that people say, oh, that person's a really good participator because I've heard them speaking with confidence out loud in the room. And I'm like, that is one way that people can demonstrate their participation, but it null and voids sort of the other people in the room who may not necessarily speak quickly or loudly in front of others. And so what we want to do is sort of think about, are there other people who are engaging in that space who may not be demonstrating their participation in that way, and making sure that they feel heard and respected as well. So inclusive participation is about widening the ways that students can participate and can contribute and reflect and also test their understanding. So the first one is offering multiple ways to participate. Now, we can obviously do this through our assignments, but I did promise you I wouldn't make you rewrite your assignments. So you can also do it in your classes. So for instance, you can allow students to participate in multiple ways. So you can say, put things in the chat. You can put things on a Padlet. You can do a poll. They can put their hand up. They can have a chat and put it on a butcher's paper and, you know, put it to the class in that way. There's multiple different ways of getting students to put their perspectives out to the class. There's also offering ways for students to participate in the activities that you run. So giving them choice of, say, a topic. So if you're doing case studies in your class, you might give them 2 case studies that they can choose which one they would like to focus on. So giving them choice of topic and letting them participate in the way that suits their strengths or interests in that particular topic as well. I would caution against giving too many options though, because that can also be a form of overwhelm. If you give sort of 10 topics, they're like, which one is the best topic? So, you know, limit it down to sort of 2 or 3 potentially instead. Use small group discussion and thinking and reading time. So it can be very nerve-wracking to potentially contribute in front of sort of 600 or 300 or even 100, or I get anxious around 20 people. So having time to think about what your answer is, potentially do a think, pair, share. So think about your answer, share it with a pair beside you, and then potentially share more broadly. So using that small group discussion to help potentially reduce some of that anxiety that students might have about sharing their perspectives, but giving thinking time as well. So when you ask a question, allow people to think about it for a moment before they have to share. And also giving reading time. So if you need a lot of reading in your class, if you're, for instance, getting students to read an article or a case study or various other things, and then expected to discuss that with other people in that group, I would think about either factoring in thinking time within the class or setting that as an activity that they can do ahead of time to read and come more prepared to the class. This one is one I really struggle with. I'm really trying to battle my inner self today with this, and that's talking at a slow and even pace. Okay, I'm typically a very fast talker, and when I'm nervous, such as when I'm presenting, I usually get faster, which is why every single slide is animated to try and slow me down. But speaking at a slower and even pace can really help students, particularly those with English as a second language and those with hearing disabilities. It can really help them sort of understand what you're saying and process things a little bit better. And the other question, which I'm also shocking at, is making sure you pose one question at a time. So if you are posing a question to students, ask the question and then pause. It's really awkward because students are thinking and then you're like, oh, I'll fill the void. But then you generally end up sort of asking a slightly little variant to your question. And then the students now thinking about your second question and it goes on. So talk at even pace and one question at a time. Teaching for the whole room and for the recording. So this is one that I would like to emphasize. So thinking about using your microphones in your room. So we have hearing loops enabled in most central teaching spaces around the university. And if you use the microphone, so the microphone and the lapel microphone in the rooms, that enables students to be able to hear what you're saying really clearly. And that goes even for small teaching spaces, because often we think, oh, I'll just project. But that may not necessarily work for students who have a hearing disability. So making sure you use the microphone, not only for those students, but also to help with the recording. Because, recording lectures, particularly at UQ, is a requirement, but it also helps with the flexibility that students may need to support their learning. And that might be people with caring responsibilities, with high work responsibilities, with physical disabilities that might come into campus really, really difficult. So we want to make sure that they feel like they're being included and able to access that learning. So you might even want to say when you do your welcome to the class, welcome everybody in the room and those who are listening on the recording, to make them feel like they are being valued and that their way of engaging is completely valid and important as well. Actively invite and value student questions. So, making space both within an in-class session, but also online for students to ask questions. And that can be, as we said, through Padlets or polls or through putting your hand up or through chat or through discussion boards, however it fits for students to sort of participate in that way. And then valuing it. So, saying, that's a great question. Thank you for asking it. Showing that you really do want those students to ask questions, which can be frustrating sometimes when you have heard the same question 4 times, but it's still really good to make sure that the students feel like their questions are being valued. And then ensure materials are meeting accessibility standards. So making sure that, that you've got high contrast with your slides, that, you're uploading documents such as PowerPoints and Word documents that students can access with screen readers and things like that. And we have recently turned on a functionality in Blackboard that will tell you how accessible your resources are. It comes up with a sort of a little symbol to tell you if it's accessible or not. It is only viewable for staff, so please don't worry that if students are viewing that, it's only accessible to staff. And we've also got a functionality now that students can actually download materials that are on Blackboard into a format that fits their learning. I won't go into detail for that, but if you're interested in that, there are sessions we're Ready to Teach Week that talk about Blackboard Ally, which is the accessibility tool that I'm referring to. And the last one I want to talk about is transparent assessment. So assessment is obviously one of the most powerful drivers of student learnings and also one of the biggest sources of stress. I would say both for students and for staff, actually, when it comes to teaching sometimes. Much of that stress really comes from the uncertainty and the unclear expectations, sometimes the unfamiliar language and the assumptions about sort of what students know and don't know. Thank you for sharing the Italy Teaching Learning Week and the sessions coming up for Ally. Thank you. So when assessment is transparent, students can focus on their learning and improvement rather than guessing what's required. And again, that guessing what's required really can cause a lot of anxiety. So how can we reduce and make sure students have a really clear understanding of what we're expecting from them for particular assignments? And again, I've gone with ones that I'm hoping are fairly easy things to sort of implement. So the first one is talking through your assessment expectations, using as plain a language as you possibly can. So this might be getting your task description, turning on a Zoom recording, and then walking through your assessment description with a little short video. It might be answering the most commonly answered or frequently asked questions that you got from the previous cohort about your assignment in that video as well. It might be getting a tutor or another member of your teaching team to come in with you in the lecture and just sit beside you and ask questions of you, and you answer them as plainly as you possibly can. So they might say, oh, what happens if I go over the word limit? And you just answer that question. Or what kind of readings would you think are okay for students to submit? And you answer that question. And again, that's also modeling that idea of asking questions and seeking help to students as well, while also kind of hopefully breaking down some of those hidden bits of the assessment that may not necessarily be in your task description. Share exemplars or annotated excerpts. So obviously sharing exemplars, I know people are pro and con on this because, they're like, if I share an exemplar, the students will copy it. I understand that, but there's also, it really does help sort of clarify to students the expectations of what different grades might look like. But you can also share excerpts of particular assessments. And it might even be that you share a 4, but you write comments to say, well, the student did this well, but they could have, to get a 5 or 6 or 7, they needed to do these things to sort of step up as well. So not necessarily providing the whole assignment, but rather excerpts, or not providing the perfect model answer for an exam answer, but rather here are the things that they wrote, but this is what they also needed to include to get a better mark. Lovely. Excellent example, Victoria. The next one, state the purpose of the task, what students are practicing and learning and why. And this can be something that, as you got the teaching staff members sort of ask you questions when you were doing the video that I mentioned up above, you could say, why should students do this assignment? Or how do you apply the skills from this assignment to your everyday life? And you can answer that to sort of emphasize why it's important for students to learn. And hopefully you can articulate why the students should be learning and doing the assignment. If you can't, that might be a time where you might need to rethink your assignment. But, talking through your process for approaching an assignment. So not even just like what the assignment is, but how you might approach it. So you might say, oh, well, I would start by reading these literature in this area, or judging some ideas here, or thinking about my structure, or writing a draft, and just talking through with students what your process is for the assignment. Again, sort of clarifying process, not just outcome. Using feed-forward language. So the next time, maybe focus on these things. And this is particularly important if you have assessments that vary in format, which is a really good thing to do. So for instance, you have an oral and then an essay and then an exam, because it gives students multiple ways of demonstrating their learning. But it can be really difficult at times for students to understand, well, how do I take the learnings from the oral and apply it to the essay, and the essay to the exam? So thinking about how can your feedback from one assignment feed into the next one? And so often that little phrase of for next time, focus on, helps you think about how is the learning from this going on into the next one, and using that to help students. Otherwise, there's a very real chance of just be like, well, that will only apply to that last assignment, so I won't bother reading it. And then the next one, using plain language in your feedback to ensure you've explained key terms. So a lot about plain language, but this is because sometimes what we think we're being really clear, but there's a dissonance between what we're saying and what potentially students are understanding. So to use an example, we had an academic in the School of Biomedical Sciences at one point who ran an activity where she got her tutors to mark an assignment, an example assignment, and they wrote comments on it, and they wrote on the criteria sheet. And then she got student partners who were students who had done the course the previous year to come in and sit with the tutor and then communicate to them how they were interpreting the comments from that particular assignment. And the tutors were shocked to realize how little of the feedback that they were providing, the rich feedback that they were providing, was actually being understood in the way it was being communicated. Because the students would say, "Oh, I thought you meant this here." And the tutor would be like, "No, no, no, I meant this." And they're like, "Well, why didn't you use this language?" And so they together ended up coming up with a vocabulary to how to better communicate that feedback to their to the next cohort of students. So, for instance, one of the examples was that the tutors were writing ref, as in REF, in a lot of different spaces. And one of the tutors meant that as in you have to do better quality references, whereas the student interpreted that as my references are really on point, like I'm doing great. Every one of these are getting a tick for references. So there's quite a difference in how they were interpreting it. Sorry, I'm just reading Chris's. All right, so I'm going to pause there. I am a little bit ahead of time, but to take a moment to choose one small change that we've articulated today, and it can be one that I've done or shared, but it can also be one that's been shared in the chat. And think about one strategy you will take from today and use in your practice. If you feel comfortable, I'd love to hear it in the chat, but obviously you're welcome to just personally reflect it in your own space as well. Thank you, Victoria. Warner, a great visual summary. Lovely. Thank you. Making sure it also mentioned when the students are online. Yeah, thanking the students online. It does make a difference for those students, I will say, Aurora. On my assignment briefs, I have a lot of information, but I will make individual for each of those steps, and I'm not sure that they read them. Yeah, so Abby, that suggestion came from the University of New South Wales, who found that they were doing video recording sort of their assessment task description and kind of explaining it to the students. And they found that they had an 80% watch percentage of students watching and looking at that resource. So it was highly engaged with.
Yeah, because I do find that they ask the same questions. They're like, I've given you the information. So
Yeah,
obviously they're not reading it.
yeah. Or potentially, as we've said before, how we're communicating it isn't quite pairing up with how they're interpreting it. Yeah. Um, I like to use the start here on your Blackboard. Thanks, Ren. Talking through the process of addressing the assessments, not just talking about the requirements of the criteria. Yep. Explain the purpose of the assessment, talking through the assessment. Lovely. So quite a few on assessments. I like your use of animation to help you slow down. Yes, it's a big problem, Tori. I got told that from my PhD supervisor. And you can very much tell in the presentations that I don't use it. It's a big issue. So I do need to use it to help me slow down. Elisa, assessment transparency. Yeah, have students mark an excerpt of an exemplar using the criteria shared. Great and relatively quick to get shared understanding of what the words and standards mean. Yeah, really like that idea, Elisa. So yeah, engage students in that assessment transparency, get them to mark an excerpt and feed and talk about that. Brilliant idea. Thank you. Visual summary of the assessment. Excellent. If anyone else has any that they would also like to share that we haven't covered today, there are a lot of things we haven't covered today. So if you'd like to pop any ideas that you think are fairly low stakes that other people can do, feel free to add those as well. Otherwise, we are now coming to the any advice if you feel like someone is being excluded by other students. Oh, lovely question. And then Chris from a recent higher ed heroes podcast, build 5-minute breaks and keep them, even if there are one or two vocal objectors in the room, consider silent majority. Lovely. Oh, okay. So we might while I let Steph deploy the poll, I might actually open it up to everyone. Does anyone have any suggestions for Aurora? If they feel like someone is being excluded by other students, does anybody want to have a chat about that? I've got some ideas, and I'm happy to share with the room first. Oh, Hannah, yep.
Hi. I like to single them out and or go and listen to a group and facilitate the group discussion. Like I teach in partnership with, well, the person who is the course coordinator. And so I'll be used to go and sit at a group and I'll just say, I really like, what do you think if I see someone silent, and then get them to talk and then ask the others what they think and try and model what we want them to do and how we want them to be. But if it's repetitive, I would think about moving them if they really weren't being they weren't taking on board what I was saying.
Lovely, thank you, Hannah. And Aurora, does that answer your question and give you some ideas there? I saw a love heart, so I'm assuming that was helpful.
I was thinking more if the students are excluding somebody else in the out of everything and you're trying to include everyone, but they're purposefully excluding someone, how would you make sure that there was that cohesion without seeming like you're interfering?
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one. I think unless one thing that I have found useful in previous classes, but it would take set up at the beginning of the class, is like a contract in terms of how everyone's going to engage in the group, and then even being quite explicit of, I'm going to make sure everyone's values and voices are being heard. The other thing you could think about is for a few weeks, give people roles, as in assigned roles within the group, and say that, your role in the group is to make sure that every voice in the group has been heard, and that person then has a role to make sure everyone's being heard. And so they will have to kind of automatically include that person to achieve what their role is doing. And then when you come and talk to the group, it can be have you made sure you're doing your role and everyone's being heard, rather than, are you including everyone just normally going to talk to that group? Yeah, possibly a way of doing it. Yeah.
I like that idea, like a chairperson for a meeting, almost making sure everyone's had their say. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. And Chris just shared one to starting in pairs, so potentially getting people in the group to turn to the pair next to them and talk sort of with the person next to them, and then share with the group, but breaking the sort of bigger group up into smaller ones. Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Chris. Okay, well, I think we're coming close to time, if I've got my time correct. So Steph, do we mind deploying the poll for feedback?
I'm just launching it now. So
Perfect,
thanks for your feedback, everyone.
And any other questions or examples that we'd like to share? Talking sticks. Oh, I like that, Elisa. That could help as well. Talking sticks. So giving sticks into the group and everybody gets shared the sticks. Yeah. Do it with compassion. Yeah, lovely. Oh, okay. Lego. Yep. If in doubt, always use Lego. Yep. And while the poll is still being shared, I will just thank you all for coming today, and for engaging and for sharing practices. Hopefully you still have access to the chat. If not, I'll try and grab some of the really nice ideas that were in there from today as well, for you to use in your practice. And hopefully you've found a few tips and tricks and things to think about as you go on your inclusive teaching and learning journey. I would like to, thank you. But if you do want to reach out and have a chat, I'll share my details in the next slide. But here are the upcoming sessions that are remaining for Ready to Teach Week. We have a great session on student access plans happening in a moment, and that's being run by the student support and wellbeing services, so Swiss, and they're going to be talking about how you do student access plans. And there are my details in case you need to email me about anything or would like any follow-up ideas. Yeah, thank you everyone for coming today.